There is a certain kind of exhaustion that appears even on good days. Nothing is wrong. No crisis is unfolding. No immediate problem needs solving. The day may have gone exactly as planned. Conversations were normal. Responsibilities were handled. The future looks relatively stable. From the outside, there is no obvious reason to feel tense. And yet, something inside never fully settles. The body remains slightly prepared. The mind remains slightly alert, as though an invisible alarm was never completely switched off. For some people, this shows up in strange moments. Sitting on a quiet evening and suddenly feeling the urge to check something again. Looking at a calendar and immediately wondering what has been forgotten. Receiving good news and somehow finding themselves preparing for what might go wrong afterward. Sometimes they notice it when everyone else seems relaxed. People are laughing, enjoying themselves, trusting the moment. And yet a part of their attention remains elsewhere. Scanning, monitoring, calculating. Not because they want to, because something inside continues searching for what has been missed. What often happens is difficult to explain, because it does not feel like anxiety in the dramatic sense people imagine. It feels practical, reasonable, responsible, almost invisible. The mind simply refuses to fully assume that everything is okay.
And because this pattern becomes so familiar, many people eventually stop noticing it altogether. They assume this is what being an adult feels like, what being responsible feels like, what being prepared feels like. But occasionally, a question appears. Why does relaxation feel harder than it seems to be for other people? Why does safety sometimes feel temporary? Why does calmness feel like something that can disappear at any moment? There is a possibility that what is happening underneath has less to do with the present moment than it appears. When people describe this pattern from the outside, they often use words like anxious, controlling, pessimistic, or overly cautious. And while those descriptions may capture part of the behavior, they rarely capture the deeper logic underneath it. Because survival mode is often misunderstood. Many people imagine survival mode as something dramatic, a person running from danger, a person responding to an emergency, a nervous system reacting to an obvious threat.
But for some people, survival mode becomes much quieter than that. It becomes normal. So normal that it stops feeling like a reaction and starts feeling like a personality. The person who always has a backup plan. The person who prepares for every outcome. The person who notices risks before anyone else. The person who struggles to fully trust good circumstances. The person who relaxes only after checking everything one more time. From the outside, it may look like caution. Inside, it often feels like protection. And that distinction changes everything. Because the brain was never designed primarily to make people happy. It was designed to keep them alive. Long before it became concerned with fulfillment, confidence, or peace of mind, it became extremely skilled at one thing: prediction. Every moment, the brain is quietly asking, what comes next? What should be expected? What should be avoided? What requires preparation? It is less like a camera recording reality and more like a forecasting system trying to stay one step ahead of it. Most of the time, this process operates silently. The mind predicts familiar roads, familiar conversations, familiar outcomes. But what often happens for people who live in survival mode is that prediction systems become unusually sensitive. Not necessarily because the world is dangerous now, but because the nervous system learned that preparation matters. Threat detection systems begin paying closer attention. Error monitoring systems become more active. Pattern recognition becomes sharper. The mind develops a habit of searching for signals before they become problems. A delayed response, a change in tone, an unexpected expense, a shift in someone's mood, a slight uncertainty in a plan. Things other people may barely notice can immediately attract attention. And from the outside, this can look exhausting. Yet from the inside, it often feels necessary. Because the brain is not trying to create fear, it is trying to reduce surprise. Surprise creates uncertainty, and uncertainty is something the nervous system is naturally motivated to resolve. What psychology often suggests is that the brain does not simply react to reality, it reacts to expectations, and expectations are built from experience. Which brings us to a deeper question. Why do some people seem able to trust stability, while others remain prepared for instability? In many cases, the answer may have less to do with personality and more to do with adaptation. The nervous system learns from repetition, not from explanations.
Not from intentions, from patterns. If certain experiences occur often enough, the brain begins treating them as predictions. Not because it wants to, because it assumes they contain useful information. For some people, early life may have felt relatively predictable. Problems appeared and disappeared. Mistakes remained manageable. Support felt available. Emotional environments felt reasonably stable. The nervous system learned that most situations eventually resolve themselves. But for others, uncertainty may have arrived more frequently. Not necessarily in dramatic ways, sometimes through inconsistency, sometimes through unpredictability, sometimes through situations where emotional safety felt difficult to anticipate. What often matters is not a single event, it is repetition. The repeated experience of not knowing exactly what comes next. The repeated experience of needing to pay attention. The repeated experience of learning that stability could change unexpectedly. Over time, the nervous system adapts. Awareness becomes sharper. Preparation becomes more automatic. Vigilance becomes useful. And eventually, what began as adaptation becomes identity. The person no longer feels like someone preparing for danger. They simply feel like someone who is responsible, someone who is realistic, someone who thinks ahead, someone who notices things. And in many ways, those descriptions are true, because survival mode does not only create difficulties, it also creates strengths. Many people who spend years preparing for uncertainty develop remarkable awareness. They notice patterns quickly. They detect shifts before they become obvious. They often read emotional situations with unusual accuracy. They anticipate consequences. They solve problems early. They recognize details that other people overlook. Their minds become exceptionally skilled at connecting information. In relationships, they may sense tension before anyone speaks about it. In work environments, they may identify weaknesses before systems fail. In everyday life, they often notice changes long before others recognize them. What appears from the outside as overthinking may sometimes be advanced pattern recognition, a nervous system trained to pay attention, a mind that learned to look beneath the surface. And this can create genuine competence, the ability to navigate complexity, the ability to remain functional during uncertainty, the ability to adapt quickly when circumstances change. But every strength carries a cost, and survival mode carries a particularly complicated one. Because the same system that helps someone detect danger also prevents them from fully experiencing safety. The same awareness that prevents mistakes can make rest feel difficult. The same preparation that creates stability can make uncertainty feel intolerable. This is where the paradox begins to emerge. Many people assume survival mode is about fear, but what often happens is more subtle. The nervous system becomes attached to readiness itself. Preparedness starts feeling safe. Alertness starts feeling safe. Monitoring starts feeling safe. And because those states become associated with protection, relaxing can begin to feel strangely vulnerable, almost irresponsible, almost risky. For some people, this creates an experience that is difficult to describe. Even when life improves, the internal posture remains unchanged. The environment becomes safer, relationships become healthier, circumstances become more stable. Yet part of the nervous system continues operating as though something important still requires attention. The body receives safety, the brain receives evidence of safety.
But deeper systems remain unconvinced, not because they are irrational, because they are consistent. They continue following rules that once made sense. And perhaps this is where many people feel most understood. Because survival mode is rarely about what is happening now. It is often about what the nervous system learned to expect. The brain keeps asking old questions. What if something changes? What if something goes wrong? What if I stop paying attention? What if I miss something important? The person may not consciously ask these questions, but their behavior often reflects them. The checking, the preparing, the monitoring, the difficulty settling, the tendency to remain slightly ahead of the present moment, always positioned toward what could happen next. And eventually, something surprising becomes visible. The exhaustion is not necessarily coming from the problems themselves. It may be coming from carrying responsibility for problems that have not happened, from continuously simulating possibilities, from remaining prepared long after preparation is needed, from standing guard during peaceful moments because standing guard became familiar.
And yet, there is something deeply understandable about that. Because survival mode did not appear without reason. It developed through learning, through adaptation, through a nervous system doing exactly what nervous systems are designed to do: protect, predict, prepare. There was nothing broken about that process. In fact, it may be evidence of how remarkably intelligent the human mind can be, how efficiently it learns from experience, how carefully it attempts to reduce pain, how seriously it takes safety. And perhaps this is the reframe that changes the entire story. People who live in survival mode are often described as anxious, but there is a possibility that something deeper is happening. What may appear to be excessive vigilance is often a system that learned responsibility early. What may appear to be overthinking is often a system attempting to create certainty. What may appear to be difficulty relaxing is often a system that spent years learning that attention matters, that preparation matters, that awareness matters. The goal is not to decide whether those lessons were right or wrong. The goal is simply to recognize them, because once the pattern becomes visible, something important begins to shift. The constant alertness stops looking like a personal flaw.
The difficulty relaxing stops looking like weakness. The endless preparation stops looking irrational. Instead, they begin to look like evidence of adaptation, evidence of a mind that learned how to survive uncertainty, evidence of a nervous system that worked very hard to create safety. And perhaps that is the quiet truth hidden underneath survival mode. It is not always a sign that danger is present. Sometimes it is a sign that danger mattered, that uncertainty mattered, that stability mattered, that safety mattered. And once a nervous system learns those lessons deeply enough, it does not easily forget them, even when life becomes calmer, even when circumstances improve, even when nothing is asking to be protected anymore. The system continues following an equation it learned a long time ago. If I stay aware, I stay prepared. If I stay prepared, I stay safe. And for some people, that equation became so deeply woven into the way they experience the world that it stopped feeling like a strategy altogether. It simply became who they are. And perhaps understanding that is not about changing the pattern. It is about finally seeing it clearly, not as weakness, not as failure, but as the lingering intelligence of a mind that spent a very long time trying to keep itself safe.